Welcome, everybody. Thank you. Get those doors closed, would you? Gore? Thank you. Today is it's the death anniversary of two of our saints. It was a thing in Christianity that they would celebrate the deaths of their saints, the days they were martyred. I don't know how familiar you guys are with that, but usually they wouldn't celebrate their birthdays. They would actually celebrate the days they were martyred. You guys know what martyred means? It was customary, it was commonplace in the first few centuries after Jesus, maybe up till about the 4th, 5th century, when Christianity became the state religion, because of someone named Constantine. Constantine was a Roman ruler who prayed to Jesus and won a battle, and then the result was that he decided to become a Christian, and he made Christianity the state religion of Rome. Gore, you see how both doors are open? There's a little lock at the top of the door on the right. You lock it down, you pull it in, and you lock it up. See it? See the little lock right there. Don't leave it for her. You take care of it. It's okay. He'll do it. So Constantine, he made a council. It's the Council of Nicaea in modern-day Istanbul, in Turkey, which used to be known as Constantinople. That was the name of it millennia ago. It was named after him. And he had a council there. It was the Council of Nicaea in 324 AD. And they voted on Christianity, what Christianity would consist of. And they came up with something called the Nicene Creed. And the Nicene Creed lays out the basics of Christianity. And then in the decades after that, Christianity became the state religion of Rome. And that's the Catholic Church. There were two centers of the church. There was Istanbul, and then there was Rome. And Rome was considered to be the Western center of the church because it was the church in Europe, and then the Eastern Church in Syria, Lebanon, and those countries, Turkey, that was the Eastern Church, and the headquarters of that was in Istanbul, modern-day Istanbul. Most people aren't aware of this, but there was a huge Christian population in the East, but they were super close to the Middle East. And so with the rise of Islam, then those places which were closest to the genesis of Islam, they largely became Muslim countries. Do you guys follow this? Because it was a center of Medina, it was a center of Muhammad's world. And so the stuff immediately surrounding, all that stuff went to Islam. And then the Ottoman Empire was based out of Turkey, actually. They sacked Constantinople and they turned it into Istanbul. And that became a huge place for the Muslims. Anyway, that was all just because people were walking in, and I wanted to just talk about nothing in particular for a couple minutes. In early Christianity, people got killed for believing in Jesus. And they called that being martyred. So you were martyred for your beliefs. And the Roman pagan government didn't like Christianity. And so for a few centuries there, first, second, third, and fourth century really, maybe even to some extent into the 5th century, tons of people got killed for being Christians before it became a state religion. And so most of the Catholic saints that we celebrate, that are celebrated, were killed during that time period, and they were canonized, and their death anniversary became what they were known for when they gave their life to Jesus. Do you guys follow this? They didn't fight, but they refused to renounce their belief system, and they were killed for it. It's pretty committed, right? You got a pagan government, and they tell you to renounce your faith, or they're going to kill you, and sometimes in really nasty ways. I mean, if you think Jesus had it bad, they would sometimes crucify people upside down, which just sounds... I mean, they're both really bad ways to go, but it certainly is not an improvement to be crucified upside down, that's for sure. And I mean, throwing to the lions, boiling in oil, they had a whole bunch of things they did. Very painful deaths people suffered for their beliefs. As somebody who believes in God myself, I have some respect. Even I might, quibble or disagree on certain philosophical ideas or theological ideas they might have, their conception of God and self and things like that. The sheer gusto and commitment that they brought to the table is impressive. Hey, no phone. Come on. She's blaming you. She was pointing at you as if you were to blame, but you were not holding the phone. She was holding the phone. You were trying to make her be quiet. You're certainly not at fault. Did you see that? That's kind of a common tendency. Like I had to ask her to stop talking on the phone, but then she looked at her friend like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why are you making me talk?" Did you see it? You can imagine. You've seen it, right? Being from India, it's like a classic thing, right? It's like a quick jujitsu. It's like it's coming at you, and you're all. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? It's almost like the purpose of your children is to blame in embarrassing situations. You can immediately look to your daughter or your younger sister or your sibling, right? And you can... yeah, I appreciate the commitment of these people to their faith. It's a big thing. It was really important to them. It wasn't just an armchair thing or something they did part-time. They were fully committed. Anyway, in general, you're not familiar. Most people don't celebrate death anniversaries. But in religious circles, it's actually not totally uncommon. And I gave you an example within Christianity, at least early Christianity, that, if you're familiar with the history of the church, you'd be familiar with this. But we do the same thing with our saints. We celebrate their birth anniversary, and we also celebrate their death anniversary. We don't even call it a death anniversary. I think for a couple of reasons. One is that we don't like to think of the soul as being born or dying. Namriyache jayate va kadachit. Krishna says in the Gita, the soul is not born. It does not die at any time. So there's a general sense in which we like to identify as souls instead of as bodies. And so we don't like to say that our guru was born on this day, and we also don't like to say that our guru died on this day. So we instead will say appearance day and disappearance day. Avirbhav and Tirobhav are the Sanskrit terms used. The appearance and the disappearance. And I think even more than not wanting to say birthday, we don't like to say death day. Because this creates like a real negative feeling. Could you close that door for me? And also shush the lady. Like look at her sternly and go, shh. It's like with children, you know? So anyway, we celebrate the birth anniversary and the death anniversary of our saints. The whole death anniversary thing seems a bit macabre, but it's actually quite common. And if you're familiar with the history of religion, you'll see that this happened, and I gave you some examples. In our tradition, we've been celebrating the death anniversary of our saints for millennia as well. We generally don't like to say death anniversary. We'll say Tirobhav, disappearance day, and Avirbhav, the appearance day. We don't like to say birth and death, and I think there's a twofold reason for that. One is we try to identify as souls instead of as bodies. And so we like to think of people as eternal beings, and we want to break free from the skin disease of seeing everything being just about this world. And people are born and they die. You follow? I think additionally, the death anniversary is particularly unpleasant because it represents the time at which those great saints disappeared from your life. And it's especially a cause of lamentation. And so, Srila Prabhupada commentating on this, he said that when your guru dies, you should cry like a queen cries when she loses her king. I was thinking about saying like a spouse dies when they lose their spouse, but that doesn't actually work. Because when kings would fall and die, oftentimes the queens would end up getting abused and treated very poorly. If the king went out to fight in a battle and lost, the opposing side would then go and ransack and rape and pillage. And the children and the women in those circumstances were extremely vulnerable. You follow? There's a reason why 99.99% of wartime deaths are men. They have more upper body strength, which translates to more capacity for violence. And so, in traditional societies and even today's society, men make up the vast majority of the military force. And the women and the children who are comparatively less capable of violence, although guns and gunpowder has, to a large extent, leveled the playing field. They would, wait back at the palace, and if word came that the king had died, oftentimes in the royal palace, all the ladies of the palace would commit suicide. It's another historical fact. They'd commit suicide because what was coming was worse. Like, you guys saw that footage from 9/11 where the people are jumping out of the building? If you think about it, what would make you jump out of a building knowing that you were going to die? What would happen that would make you jump out of the building? Like, what could possibly happen to make you jump out of the building?
There's a chance that you might survive.
No. Nobody's thinking, I'm going to jump from 100 stories up. It's not 30, it's like 100 stories up, 70 stories up, and I'm going to live. Nobody's thinking that. That's wrong. That was not what was happening. They were burning to death, and it was so unbelievably painful. Smoke inhalation wouldn't make you jump out of the building. They were burning to death, and the pain of burning to death was so extreme that they killed themselves because it was just that painful. You follow this? So we, in our lifetimes, we saw an example of people killing themselves because the pain got to be too great. Of course, we don't normally think about it like this, but even when people kill themselves because of mental health issues, which is a huge cause of death around the world, it's a major cause of death around the world, mental health issues, people committing suicide. But they must be going through so much agony living. They're tortured mentally. There's something called the Mental Health Parity Act that Obama passed when he came into his presidency. And it meant that insurance companies had to consider mental health issues to be on par with physical health issues. Up until Obama came into office and till the Democrats controlled both houses, and they were able to pass laws and legislation. Prior to that time, insurance companies would regularly pay for physical stuff, but if you had mental health issues, they wouldn't pay for them. That all changed with the Mental Health Parity Act, which gave rise to body brokering and abuse of drug rehabilitation centers and so many problems that have ensued, but not discussing that. Eventually, we had to accept that mental health issues were just as severe as physical health issues. The Mental Health Parity Act. You familiar with this? It's how you got in business. That's why there's so many rehabilitation centers around now. It's because insurance companies had to start paying, whereas previously they would deny to pay for drug rehabilitation, for instance, or other mental health disorders. So people who commit suicide must be undergoing so much torture and trauma mentally. You can't see it physically. It's easier to see if somebody's burning to death. It's hard to see if they're burning in here. That they kill themselves. So the queens would commit suicide because what was coming was so extreme that committing suicide was the only solution. So Prabhupada gave the comment that a disciple should cry like the wife of a king, like the queen when the king dies. And I thought about making it egalitarian and making it gender neutral, but it doesn't actually work. You follow this? Like in unions, they call people your union brother and your union sister. So they try to get rid of that and make it gender neutral. Say, just call them your comrade. And they're like, nah, that sounds like communist. Or they just call them your friend. No, that doesn't work because I have more of a bond with these people than that. And brother and sister, it communicates a family bond. It's gendered language, but it communicates a family bond. That's much more intimate than relative or cousin. You follow? So sometimes the gendered nature of an example is critical for understanding the example fully. And this is one of those instances. The wife of a king, the queen, crying when her husband dies because now she's truly bereft and there's no one to protect her and people are going to come and take advantage and abuse and there's no one to protect her. Disciples feel like that when their guru passes away. Because they've lost this, a teacher, a light, a bright spot, a sun. in their life that sets a superlative example and also surgically gives teachings, brings to life the teachings of our scriptures. The scriptures are the notations of our gurus from a long time ago, inspired by divinity. But they lack specificity, because as you live your life, you go through a very unique set of variables that conspire together to form a very specific life experience. So you can have general rules like murder is wrong, but what about in a case where somebody is defending themselves? It's a self-defense situation. And so there's no way to just write it all down. Ultimately, you have to have a judge and a jury, and they have to hear evidence, and they have to think about it, and they take previous precedents into account, and they render a verdict. But there's no amount of literature or legal precedents that you can, or codes of laws that you can put together. Similarly with medicine. Ultimately, a doctor needs to look at you and think it through. What's the best thing for you? What exact amount of medicine to give? Do we titrate that medicine down? Do we increase it? When do we do surgery? When do we do other things? What's your stamina? What's your general constitution? What can you handle? What can you not handle? With things with a serious enough degree of complexity, you need somebody who can weigh all those things and render an expert opinion and give expert advice. But if it's just in the book, it's not, it lacks that certain living vital quality and that nuanced and detailed, tailor-made for you quality. Do you guys follow this? Therefore, the guru as a superlative example in your lifetime of how to walk the path of devotion. Like, what car would Jesus drive? Seems like a stupid question. What car would Jesus drive? Seems like a foolish question, doesn't it? But the nature of that question is, Jesus, who embodied certain principles and ideals that were thousands of years ago, if he was to land here in this time and place, what would that look like? Maybe, would he just be walking barefoot? Probably not. He was a religious leader. He wasn't a homeless person. And although that worked for religious leaders back then, it doesn't work so much now. Would he take a bus? Maybe. He was a pretty significant religious leader. He had a following. His followers had money. They owned property. He was the head of their church. It's doubtful that he would have taken the bus. You follow? So what would Jesus drive? Prius? I tend to think of Prius. Maybe a Tesla, but that's a little too sexy. You know what I mean? Jesus wouldn't drive a Tesla. He would drive a Prius. Right? Or whatever the better version of that is, you know? Huh? A Nissan Leaf? Is that that's like the new better version of a Tesla? Prius?
Electric car that's like kind of lower down.
A Nissan Leaf. Like a leaf blowing in the wind. Strange name for a car. Obviously it's better for the environment. Yes, sir?
As far as I remember, Jesus didn't use a horse. He was using a donkey just to show that, how limited things we need actually. He had only one road. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. You're 100% correct. And actually, Jesus' followers who walked around Galilee in the aftermath of Jesus' appearance, they walked barefoot, and the Stoics used to carry their belongings in a bag, like on a stick, like a bag over their shoulder. But Jesus' followers didn't even carry anything. They just had the clothes off their back, and they walked barefoot. And even in India today, oftentimes sadhus will walk barefoot. Like Jains are very well known for this. Even the Jains will walk naked. The Digambars. They're clothed. Ambar means clothed. In dig means the directions. They're clothed in the directions. Digambar. 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 And so they're clothed in the directions, which means they walk around naked. But they've always got a bunch of followers around them, protecting them and making sure nothing weird happens. And so the society's set up like that for saintly people to live penniless and beg, or like in Buddhism in Southeast Asia, the Buddhists have to beg. They're not allowed to have any property. So they go and beg every time. There's an hour during the day where they go out and beg. This actually happens in San Diego. The Buddhists will go and beg at their monastery. Thich Nhat Hanh has a monastery in San Diego, very close to our farm actually. And the Buddhist monks there will go and beg every day. But a bunch of rich Buddhist congregation members show up at the ashram every single day and hang out at the appropriate time, and the Buddhist monks come out to beg and they give them stuff to eat. You follow? So the society is set up in such a way where they can live that same ascetic life because the lay people in the congregation create a society where that happens. Either on a micro level, like at this ashram, or in India, it's very common. Sadhus will just live outside, live outdoors, they'll beg, and the shopkeepers give them, and they maintain themselves, and they live a simple life. Usually by the side of a river, so they can wash their cloth easily and stuff like that. Our society is not set up like that in the West. So if Jesus was here as a religious leader in today's times, you'd have to figure it out. He had rode a donkey, but he didn't ride no vehicle. He rode a donkey. And he wore some clothing that was appropriate for an ascetic during his time, but that certainly wouldn't be appropriate during this time. So now you have to translate those ideals that were austere at that time and figure out how those same ideals would be embodied at this time. Do you follow that now? And therefore I said, what would Jesus drive? And I came up with some options. The bus would be an option, but given that he was a religious leader and doing important work, I'm assuming his followers would not have permitted for him to just... Like the Pope washes the feet of prisoners once a year because Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. And so Pope Francis, or whoever the Pope is, they wash the feet. He took it a step further. He washes women's feet and Muslims' feet and atheists' feet. Usually it was Catholic prisoners' feet, but now he takes it a step further and washes, people who aren't part of this faith. He washes their feet as an act of humility. But the cameras show up and they pick who's going to be honored by this, and they come to a place in appointed time, and he has a nice silver chalice of water that he washes their feet with, and it's a whole thing. It's not like he's just wandering around washing people's feet, walking around Rome incognito. He's the Pope. He drives the Pope-mobile, which is some kind of super souped up Nissan Leaf with bulletproof glass. Because they might try and assassinate him. So he has to drive a vehicle, but it's a special vehicle, which is designed for him. And so the position of the guru is there's somebody during your time who grew up in a similar situation than you did, usually a generation before, 2 generations before, but in a similar time, and they know how to live a spiritual life in your milieu, in your time. And they set an example, and they give you nuanced guidance and advice that's tailor-made for you. There's a guidance that has to be tailor-made for your time, but then within that time, there's so many individuals with different life experiences, and you need to give the guidance for you. And the scriptures come to life in the form of a teacher who's mastered those subjects and can apply them. And it's really the same position a judge occupies. They can arbitrate. They can look at the same position a doctor occupies. You guys feel the point I'm making now? And so when the king disappears, the other people in the palace, they're weeping because they love the person, but also because they've lost their shelter. We feel like that when our gurus pass away. Some of my gurus have passed away. We feel like that when our gurus pass away. And we don't like to say they've died. Not only is it contrary to the idea of being a soul, but it also is painful to think about. And so we like to say they disappeared, acknowledging that they still live in our hearts, they still live through their instruction, they still live through the example they set for us that continues to guide and inspire us. Does that make sense? So anyway, today is the disappearance day of a couple of our saints. One who passed away just last year, Bhakti Charu Maharaj. And the other one who's actually on our altar, Srivas Thakur. They both disappeared today. And so Bhakti Charu Maharaj just last year, he was a big figure in my life. Huge personality in my life. Someone I've known since I was a boy, for my entire adult life. I'm actually here in Laguna Beach because of him. He told me to come here and serve here. For the last 20 years, I've been following that instruction. 22 years. And then Srivas Thakur, who's such a great saint, he's wound up on our altar. And so today is their disappearance day. And rather than discussing the specifics of them, I want to discuss the general principle. How important it is to have people in your life who can look at the very specific time that you live in, and even further, the very specific set of circumstances that makes up your life, and give you guidance and advice and help and friendship and counsel to help us navigate the world. That's why you always need judges. There's no set of legal codes which gets rid of the necessity of judges. There's no medical book which gets rid of the necessity of a doctor. There's a certain level of complexity. They have to see it, touch you, see it, look at the specifics, and then they can give tailor-made advice. In this sense, the scriptures come to life in the hands of a Vaishnava, in the hands of a devotee, in the hands of a saint. They come to life two ways. One is that person embodies those principles expressed on a superlative level. They themselves are a walking manifestation of what the scripture should look like, what one's life who's been transformed by divinity looks like. On the other hand, they help guide you through life because they've already walked the journey themselves. And therefore you can apprentice under them, and they can show you the ropes in a way that you'd never be able to figure out by watching videos and reading books, which in many ways are a practical way to attempt to give guidance to people. And so anyway, I have a couple other thoughts. So when they pass away, we cry like a queen cries, because we miss them, but also because we've lost such a bright light in our life. We've lost our shelter. And so Prabhupada chose that gender specific, that gendered example. The scriptures actually mention it, because it really communicates this point nicely. And sometimes a gendered example is an excellent one. Usually you can make things gender neutral, but sometimes things are quite specific. Gender exists, and in addition to being a social construct, it also has a chromosomal genetic component to it, and a relational component as well. Father figures, mother figures is a little more specific than parental figures. Brother and sister implies more intimacy than mere relative. And so the gendered nature of this example really highlights what's being communicated. Anyway, the other point I wanted to make was that Today is Independence Day. And so it's the day we declared our independence from the English crown. That happened in India in 1947. So India just did this themselves. But it was in 1776 that this was declared, on this day in 1776. And so we declared our independence from the English crown, who was taxing us without giving us representation. Government. Did I get it right?
Taxation without representation.
Yeah. Today is the day the Declaration of Independence was signed, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Wasn't ratified till 88, but yeah.
You're killing me, dude. I know there's some details I'm missing. I'm going from memory. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the Declaration of Independence was signed, and we declared our independence from the English because they were taxing us without representation, because they were oppressive, and at some point the people in the colonies who were independent, they risked life and limb to get away from England. So they represented the more radical factions of England. They wanted to get away from England. They wanted their own, a lot of times over religious freedoms. They wanted to be able to practice their faith the way they saw fit, and didn't want to be under the Anglican Church, which was the official Church of England. And so they came out here because they had some more exotic, cult-like religious beliefs, like the Quakers and the Puritans, that didn't jive with the English crown's version of Christianity. And they wanted to just be in a place where they could practice what they wanted, the way they wanted to. Anyway, so they declared their independence, and then they fought and died for something bigger than themselves, for a bigger idea. And in a lot of ways, that's precisely what devotees do. They get a big idea, they get a dangerous idea that I'm a soul in a body. I'm not a body. I don't have a soul. I am a soul. I have a body. There is a creator. That creator loves me and is filled with infinite grace. The purpose of my life is to reconnect with that creator in a powerful way. And that's what I'm going to live my life for. And I'm going to help other people do the same thing. And that's the panacea that the world needs. That's a life worth living. That's something worth dying for. And so the same way, the consequences of declaring independence from England was that many people died. Nathan Hale was an early revolutionary. He was 19 years old, and he was hung by the British Crown. And he's famous for saying, "I'm so satisfied by the cause in which I'm engaged that my only regret is I have but one life to give for my country." I'm so satisfied. He was 19 years old. He was being hung till death, never married. Most probably was a virgin, no children, no issue, no heir, had never really done anything in his life. And they said to him, "Do you have any final words?" And the newspaper reporters from that time reported what he said as he was about to be hung. He said, "I'm so satisfied with the cause in which I'm engaged that my only regret is I have but one life to give for my country." That's powerful. Powerful enough that 240 years later, I know what he said. Can you close that door for me? Thank you, Pramanjana. Powerful enough that 240 years later, I know what he said. 250 years later, I know what he said. So the people who were fighting for the independence in this country, they found something that was valuable enough where they're like, okay, I'm going to give my life for this. I'll give my life, maybe the life of my children for this. We're going to fight for this. It's worth fighting for. Worth dying for. Worth living for. And the saints in our tradition who passed away today, they also had that same realization. And we also want to have that same realization. And when you compare political freedom, when you compare, different philanthropic causes that you can get engaged in, different activist movements you can participate in, I can't think of anyone that's better than loving the divine, and thereby loving everybody, and solving the entire problem of material existence by realizing you're a soul and not a body, such that no matter what circumstance you get put in, you can be happy and satisfied because you've done the best thing with your life, the best thing with your heart, and you've touched transcendence. In this brief temporary life, you managed to reach through a portal and touch transcendence. That is, and I think will always be and always has been, the greatest cause. You can have different conceptions of God, you can have different conceptions of self, different ideas about how to connect with God. You can have different conceptions of God and such, but this basic idea that the purpose of my life is to connect with something bigger. I'm a soul. There's more than just this world. I'm a self and not a body. There's a loving creator. Those core ideas are the best ideas that have ever existed. The most worthy cause to be engaged in. The most valuable thing to give your life and death for. 150 years ago, one of our saints who lived in Bengal during the British Raj wrote in English. He was Bengali, but he wrote in English. He wrote, "He reasons ill who says that Vaishnavas die, for thou art living still and sound," for they live still and sound. Vaishnavas die to live. That's the basic idea behind martyrdom. Even in a jihad situation, like I said, there might be differences over what you think is going on in heaven, what you think a worthwhile cause to die for is. But Vaishnavas die to live. Eventually we're going to have to relinquish our body. And for the devotee, death is another step forward in their forward progress towards the divine. Vaishnavas die to live, and while living, spread the holy name around. He reasons ill who says that Vaishnavas die. That's why we don't like to say death anniversary. For thou art living still and sound. Vaishnavas die to live, and while living, spread the holy name around. While alive, we try to give back, give forward, help people, see the wonderful things that we've seen, create opportunities for people to get the same blessings we got. And then when it's time to let go and give up and move on, we do it like heroes, like heroines, unafraid. And we step forward. Bhakti Charu Maharaj one time told me he had some heart problem. And I was encouraging him, "Oh, Maharaj, you should go and get, surgery or whatever you require." He goes, "No," he says, "it's okay." And I was asking, like why? He said, "I'll let them do something, but I'm not going to make a huge deal out of it." And I asked him why, and he told me, I feel like I'm a chauffeur, and this body is my car, and I drive for my master wherever he wants me to go. I'll fix my car, but I'm not my car, and if it comes time where my car is worn out and I need to get a new car to continue driving for my master's the richest man. He'll buy me a new car, and I'll drive that car. He was saying, I'll take care of my health a little bit, but I'm not going to make that big of a deal out of it, and if it's my time to go, I'm comfortable going, and Krishna will give me a suitable form to continue serving him in, and I'm not going to hold on like just like some kind of incredibly attached miserly person for like 2 extra breaths, hold on to this body, because he's not a materialist, he's a spiritualist, and that's what it means. I was shocked when he said this. It was like so far beyond my level of realization. His confidence, his lack of fear. Those are our saints. Those are our heroes. Those are our revolutionaries. And we're going to have to pick up the cross and follow them, walk in their footsteps. It's the same thing for every generation. We're in this world. We got a body. Don't get too attached to it. Maintain it. We're not anti-medicine. But at some point, old age is going to rear its ugly head, or sometimes before that, and you're going to have to fathom and think about and eventually let go and move on. That's the gig. That's what it means to be in this world. Not letting go is not on the menu. Holding on to your body is not on the menu. So anyway, I was thinking about the saints who passed away today, both modern and medieval, and I was thinking about just the concept of dying and how that's treated by our tradition. And I was thinking about the idea of independence and how that carries with it also the potential of dying. Francis Bacon said that the price of freedom is the unwavering defense of it. That you actually have to fight for freedom. It's not just free and cheap. It's not just, there's this idea that like somehow or other, everything that you've gotten, you just deserve. But if you're aware of the history, you realize that the privileges you enjoy, somebody paid for them. And then you have a responsibility to maintain them and not just take them for granted. Anyway, I was thinking about all these things, and that was today's class. Thank you very much. Let's do a little kirtan now. Hari Hari Bol.